Now back in session.
Okay.
The gentleman who's running the video asked everyone to please speak up because we're getting emails from folks who are watching saying that they can't hear us. And this is kind of caught on. There are a lot of people interested in what we're doing, so use your outside voice, as Richard would say. And the acoustics of this room aren't the greatest because of the shape, so.
Wynn was discussing we're back in session.
Yeah, so we can move, Dr. Bernard can stay a little bit, so we'll just move one by one through the agenda.
Okay.
Item 4 was discussion of the opinion request from District Attorney Ponton and the Commission's response. In your materials are the there are letters that the DA sent to the Attorney General asking for an opinion on the arson review, as well as our response. When we sent you all the materials, we didn't have this fire marshal's response, but now we do. So Lee distributed that. That goes into very thorough detail about what the fire marshal's jurisdiction is under the state laws applicable to that agency. But the gist of it is that the district attorney received a letter from the scientific advisory group, or the science advisory group, after a review of the Sonia Casey case was conducted, and was concerned, I think, about what the ramifications of that were, because the letter essentially says that the science advisory group, and I'll ask Kelly for the exact language, he's here with us today from the fire marshal's office, but essentially that the scientific findings would not be supported by current standards, modern standards. So the DA received this letter and was concerned about what that means from a legal standpoint, and submitted an opinion request to the Attorney General asking whether the Forensic Science Commission has the jurisdiction or authority to delegate its own authority to the fire marshal's office so that the fire marshal's office could conduct that review. And so what we're trying to explain to the Attorney General is that we never delegated that authority because we don't have the ability to do that even if we wanted to. And that essentially what happened was there was a report that contained 17 recommendations in it that a lot of everyone around this table, but Dr. Pirwani wasn't even here for at the time, but the 17 recommendations included a recommendation that the fire marshal's office conduct an internal review of its cases to ensure that no one is currently imprisoned based on outdated or invalid scientific principles, because we know that in the fire discipline, in particular fire investigation, the community's understanding of fire science has changed drastically in the last couple of decades, and that's across the country, including Texas, but not just Texas. So the fire marshal's office took it upon themselves to implement those recommendations, and what we're explaining to the Attorney General are those jurisdictional issues. So you can take a look at that. If you have any questions, let us know. The AG's office will respond. Probably will take about 6 months, perhaps longer, for that to happen, but we'll distribute their response when we receive it. So I think what the lesson learned from this, and I talked with Chris Keneally about this, they had not invited the DA's offices that were involved in the original cases to the science advisory group, and what they're doing now is inviting the DAs to every time they investigate a case or do a review of a case, they're inviting the prosecutor, and that way the prosecutor from beginning to end can see exactly what's happening, who the folks are who are reviewing it, understand the process, understand the science, and so I think that will be helpful. Kelly, did you want to say anything else about it, or?
No, I think that the agency's response that went back to the AG was, where we stand with it, and it's just part of us implementing the 17 recommendations and trying to make the fire investigation profession better to move forward.
So we'll let you all know what comes out of that. Since that time, we have been in touch with the District Attorney Ponton's office, and I think communications are opening, and that's a good thing. So he will be in attendance at the Science Advisory Group's next meeting in December, so that should help quite a bit. And I think we learned the lesson that we always want to make sure that all stakeholders are there and participating, because that helps avoid misunderstandings from the outset. So
There was another thing also that would prevent getting involved. Part of the issue was the autopsy.
right,
that-
and we wouldn't look at that.
Right. That specifically is excluded in our authority.
Right.
I think for us, it really is a non-issue. We did not delegate anybody to do that.
Right.
And the fire marshal's office has all the legal rights to do whatever they want to do. And it really has nothing to do with us. We made a recommendation.
Yeah.
We made a recommendation that the fire marshal should conduct investigation. And for those of us who were not part of that recommendation way back, there were allegations made in those days that there were some 800 or 900 people serving terms because of wrongful accusations, and we now know that that's really not the right number. And as IPOT has said, perhaps there are some people in the jail in Texas, we can count them on your hand literally. So I think this is an example. There are few cases that we're looking at, but really it's outside the responsibility of the commission. The commission has no right to delegate. It never had that right, and the commission did not delegate the responsibility.
Right.
It made a recommendation, and that's it.
Exactly. So.
You want to discuss the form.
Oh, that's right. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on from that one, and we'll just keep you updated on what the AG says. Dr. DeMaio just pointed out to me that I forgot about the forms, and what I wanted to tell you is that we have revised the forms for complaints. Those are in your packet. Now, because we're revising and revamping our website, the way that will look online is significantly different than how it looks in your packet. It's sort of basic text in your packet. What I took the liberty of doing, and I hope it's okay with everybody, we used to have a complaint form and an anonymous complaint form. And I really believe, both from a legal perspective and just from a practical perspective, that it's a little misleading to even have an anonymous complaint form, because we can't protect the anonymity of people who submit complaints to the commission. If they submit identifying information in there, it's subject to the Public Information Act request, period. So they can decide not to do that, but what I would rather do is have one complaint form that has language in there. If you may choose to submit this anonymously, and we'll do the best we can to preserve your anonymity, but we can't guarantee it. And we can withhold information from disclosure as long as there's an investigation pending and no report has been issued. But as soon as the report is issued, it's all subject to the PIA anyway. So I felt like it would be a misleading, for lack of a better word, for the public to believe that they could really do anything anonymously, truly anonymously. If their identity comes out, it comes out. And then the other form is for laboratories to do their self-disclosures. And a couple labs that have done self-disclosures have already used the form, and I haven't heard any complaints about it. It seems like it covers the bases. The form also includes a description of the commission's clarified jurisdiction so people understand it. If you have any revisions to it, let me know. Otherwise, it'd be great to take a vote so we can implement that.
I move that we vote to implement the new revised form.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Before we do that, I wanted to ask Lynn, can they fill that on the computer? Or do they
Yes,
have-
on the website. They can
How
fill
would
it
they
out.
put the signature then?
There's an electronic
Electronic.
signature, yeah. And what happens, and with our new website, the form will generate into a PDF that Lee receives, and then she files it electronically. We'll print out all the materials for you the same way we always do. They'll go in the Dropbox and in your binders.
All right.
okay. Motion was made. Second. Okay. Aye. Nay. Unanimous.
And I should let you know that there's going to be a feature on our new website for the public to search complaints. They can search, hopefully, by forensic discipline, by laboratory. We're working on a whole bunch of things to help people really be able to see what the commission has before it. So that'll be good once we get it rolling.
Yeah. We're moving on. Do you want to go?
We might as well just do quickly the update on arson case review and implementation of recommendations. We have Kelly Kistner here from the State Fire Marshal's Office because Chris is at a National Fire Marshal Conference in Boston, I think. Do you want to say anything, Kelly, or?
I would just say that the 17 recommendations that were issued a while back are all either being worked on or continually worked on, improved upon, and I would take any questions that you may have. The arson case reviews are going well. The next meeting will be start December 3rd, that Tuesday, and we'll proceed through the 6th. So the science advisory workers will be there. At this point, I know we have 4 confirmed cases that we'll be looking at that have been brought forward. And we'll also be taking a look again with the district attorney present at the Casey case. All the district attorneys that have cases going in December have been notified. The agencies that were involved have all been notified so that they can come forth and if they have information to provide. And so that's where we'll be at starting with December. The next meeting after that will be in February, and it will be in Corpus Christi, which will be the next one. So the meetings are continuing. We're continuing to look at those cases, and the recommendations are, we're working on all 17, and there's been at least some progress made on all of those and continue to work towards those. So I would take any specific questions if anybody has them.
Are there any obstacles you've encountered in doing this investigation? It sounds like it's worked. I mean, you've got a system in place and it's working well. Have there been any things you've come up against that are proving problematic?
I would say that some of the things we've come up against is as we're pulling some of these cases is the ability to obtain all of the information. It takes several trips, or it's taken several phone calls, or quite a bit of effort in some of these cases because of the time lapse to get some of that information. However, the district attorneys, their offices, the agencies who actually initially investigated the cases, along with IPOT, they've been real good about helping us to gather all the information. But that's really the biggest hurdle we have to jump every time we go to look at the case.
Richard, some of the cases are pretty old, so records are, dispersed between courts and the ME office and the district attorney's office. And the other issue, of course, is the evidence itself. If the fire marshal's office wants to re-examine that evidence and reanalyze, it's very hard to get it back. In the case of Casey, for example, I think we had the same issue at the commission way back when we were discussing the case. There is no evidence left for us to reanalyze, so I think we'll encounter that as we go forward.
So have you encountered situations where the evidence was just not retained, so there's nothing to test, or is it a matter there wasn't anything collected and preserved and offered? Which?
Both.
Okay.
And in some cases we've had, because of natural disasters across the state, some of the records have been destroyed as a result of flooding or hurricanes. So that's, we've had some problems there. And in some cases we have the lab reports to work off of, or we may have different, pieces of information to re-examine the evidence. And in some cases there just was no evidence collected to begin with.
Thank you.
You bet.
I was invited to speak at the Texas District and County Attorneys Association meeting in December, right, Richard?
Yes, December
in San
4th.
Antonio, and part of the presentation I'll talk about all of this, the arson review, the interaction with the DA's office, so that all of the DAs understand what the commission does and does not do. Because we want to make sure they understand the commission is not about determining guilt or innocence, and that these cases often have quite a bit of evidence in addition to the fire analysis. The fire analysis is one piece. I think it's rare, and Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but in most cases, there's going to be other things there to consider besides just the fire analysis, and that's what the court's job is to figure out how and how to treat any new evidence that's identified. So
I think that's correct, and I think it's going to go a long way to just reminding people, because apparently there's still confusion about the impact, even though statute clearly states what our findings can and cannot be used for. There's still confusion out there, and I think talking to the electeds, which is the group you're going to talk to, would help a great deal.
I think we're going to go on to the hair now.
Yeah.
Okay, going on to the subject of the microscopic hair analysis.
Okay, so after the last meeting, we sent letters, and you've seen the letters that we sent to all of the labs in Texas, asking them if they've performed microscopic hair analysis at any point in their existence, essentially. 20 of the state's labs have performed that analysis at some point. That includes 12 of the 14 DPS labs. And as you might imagine, the labs are in the major metropolitan areas for the most part. So there's a cluster in Houston, there's Swifts in Dallas, there's the Tarrant County ME's office and the Fort Worth PD, and then there's Bexar County. So those labs have responded. There's a chart in your materials that's not quite up to date because we got sort of a flurry of responses right here at the end. But what I would say is that we're working with these 20 labs. They range in size from obviously the DPS system and labs like Swifts to small labs like the Pasadena PD's office. Now, the responses we've received also range in detail from, I'll just use Swifts and Pasadena PD as an example, where they've already identified numerically what cases they have. Pasadena actually pulled all 8 of their cases that they located and have looked at the reports and given us excerpts. And then there are other labs, and DPS falls into this group, where the response has been, we understand this is happening and we'll do whatever you want us to do, but with the resources we have right now, we would have to pull people off the bench and it would affect our backlog to actually identify the cases. Because remember, we're dealing with cases in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, probably early to mid 90s, because after that it switched to DNA. In a lot of those situations, the files are stored either physically off-site, maybe in a county storage unit, or they're on microfilm. So they'd have to have somebody sitting in front of a microfiche looking at case files to identify them. The limbs nowadays, you could see, you know, here are all of our drug chemistry cases. But because there wasn't a LIMS in place back then, it's harder to identify the hair cases as a group. So it's actually taking the labs themselves quite a bit of effort to do that. Now, if you contrast what we have in Texas with what's going on nationally, the FBI made a decision. We're going to look at these cases and we're going to pull them all together. And so they brought the estimate from the director of the FBI lab was 50 people that they brought, staff people, together in a big effort in the beginning to identify, to pull from the files all of the cases they had. And they had like 20,000 cases, and they've narrowed those down significantly from there. And the way they did it was they looked at everyone they knew on their staff who performed microscopic hair analysis. They pulled all their cases. But those folks also performed other disciplines. So then they had to go through all of their cases, pull out the hair cases, and then they worked down from there. The challenge is if the commission is going to move forward, and I see this as the first challenge. I don't think we're going to have a challenge looking at the testimony and the transcripts. And the reason I say that is because from the time the commission started considering doing this until now, I have had many, many, many people step forward in the legal community and say, we will help. You know, from the clinics to, you know, our usual cast of characters from IPOT, the state bar, all kinds of people who've said, we'll help look at transcripts if you all decide how you want to proceed with it. But the first step of how do we deal with helping the laboratories, some labs have said, we're going to do this. We got the memo from MassCloud Lab and we're moving forward and we're going to do this anyway. Some have said, we can't do it. It's not possible with the resources we have, or it's just not possible based on the way our filing system is done. So that's the situation we're in. It's a bit tricky now, just to keep in mind, the commission can't force anybody to do anything. You know, you can start a process, sort of a voluntary process of facilitating and coordinating the review of these cases, but there's no authority to force people to do anything. So it's sort of up to you how you want to proceed.
Lynn, there are several issues, and I'll tell you experience of our lab. I can, without much problem, identify how many hair samples we analyzed over the last 4 or 5 years. I have to do it manually because the crypt was on logging it as such. But I can do that. But having done that, now the question is that what did the police agency do with that report? Did they file a case or not?
Right.
And then I have to go to the district attorney's office, and we want to see if the district attorney's office, in fact, took that evidence into consideration in the trial and was at a trial. And then they have to pull a trial transcript. And we've been doing this now for what, 2-3 months?
Mm-hmm.
And I've just got 2 cases so far
Right.
that I have a resolution. So even if I'm willing to pull those cases, there are so many players involved.
Right.
It's not just the lab or the office that is involved. There's a lot of players involved.
Mhm.
So I wanted to alert you that, you know, it's a great thing that we want to do it, but there are limitations to how much we can go forward with this.
There's another problem, and I think the FBI pointed it out, was what are your criteria
Mm-hmm.
for the classification of these hair things as being, you know, the testimony was too much, or the testimony was perfectly legally by the present standards, and you have to draw these categories up. And then you have to, once you get the categories, decide where you're going to draw the line and say, on one side, that's wrong, on the other side, it's okay. And I think the FBI is still struggling with that.
Yeah, and I do think that I have tremendous confidence in our ability to pull together a good team that could look at it and really decide on an error protocol. I think that the DAs would be involved. I think Jeff can speak to this, but he's already talked to the District Attorneys Association. They're willing to step up and participate, which is critical. Obviously, we would have defense bar and the scientists, because in the FBI process, from what we understand, they were given 3 error categories, and the scientists did not weigh in on those error categories, and that's not okay. We would not do that in Texas, I don't think, ever. So I guess for me, that process of deciding how to go about it, I feel like we have such a great community here to do that. But I'm still struggling with identifying the cases in the first place and the resources we would need. I mean, I've asked the controller at Sam Houston, just as an example, if people need overtime, like none of the labs have said we won't do it, but what they've said is we have a resource issue. So we would need X number of hours in overtime to be able to send somebody into the bowels of the archives to pull this stuff. Is the commission going to set aside money for that? They're not saying that, I'm saying that. And can we even do that? So the financial folks at Sam Houston are looking into what we can and cannot do for that. But are we going to tell a laboratory that's already backlogged, you need to pull all these cases and we're not going to give you anything to help you do that? And you both have been involved in doing it, so you know how much it takes.
Well, and it seems also, I mean, you need a support staff person to find the information, but the real hard part is then that has to be reviewed, and the eyes that are put to that by the laboratory, that they have a limited resource of people, and they can't be doing the testing on their current cases at the same time they're reviewing this. So that's, to me, that's the other obstacle that I don't know how you get around, because it's just, it isn't just a matter of amount of time involved, it's a limited number of qualified people who can lay eyes on that stuff and make that determination. And I don't know how you fix that, because I don't see, and it isn't like an outside group can do it, or I don't think they can do it.
So there's a third problem too. just because a report says something, you don't know what was said at the trial.
So you have to
Right.
read the
And
transcript.
some of the problems was, it was not with the scientist, it was with the district attorney, saying things he should,
Right.
What, and as I understand the process, we aren't limited to cases that went to trial. We're not even, usually our complaints start with the person that has been convicted of something, and that kind of drives the bus as far as the investigation goes. But we're looking for stuff that may not be a problem, and nobody's complaining about it at this point. And
Right.
so it's a much broader group, and so there's a lot more time than is typically spent on these investigations looking for something with a higher likelihood that it maybe wasn't even used or considered.
Right. I think because it's starting at the labs, they don't have the end result. So that necessarily is true, what you're saying, Richard. I do think that as part of the criteria used to actually look into the cases in any detail, you could have a factor which is whatever happened with this case, did they even proceed with it? Because if, for example, if they didn't proceed with it, why are we going to look at it? If there was DNA testing done subsequently that resolved the issue, why would the commission look at it? I mean, there are a bunch of common sense criteria that can be used to narrow down the cases, but you're still dealing with this resource discrepancy to pull them in the first instance. But then what do? I would say half the labs have gone ahead anyway. They're doing it anyway, and they're going to keep doing it, and it's going to take them months, but they're moving forward.
But they can only identify the cases they've done, that's all.
Right.
Not anything beyond that. I can tell you at the end of 6 months how many hair cases they've done in the past 2 or 3 years. But what is that information used for?
Then you have to take it, you got to get the DA.
I have to first go to
Yeah.
the police department
Right.
and see what do they do with that, because most of the hair cases that we have, in fact, all of them are driven by the police department, investigative. You know, they're not part of the ME file, so they're part of the crime investigation. So that report basically goes to a police department or the sheriff's office, and then they have to decide what they're going to do with that. I mean, maybe the case was adjudicated outside the trial. We don't really know that.
Right.
And if it was not, then in fact, did it go to the trial? Did it go to the DA's office? And if it did go to the DA's office, how much weight was there placed on this particular piece of evidence? We don't really know that. And besides, I shouldn't be reviewing the testimony. I think there should be a third party doing that, and the district attorney should not review that. I mean, that we should locate those files and then give to a third party to adjudicate whether this played an important role in the conviction of a person. So it's a process that will take time.
I don't think it can be done by one organization. The crime lab would be identifying the case and obtaining the report. Then that has to go over in a way to the district attorneys to see if they ever prosecuted. If there was no prosecution, it's academic.
Mm-hmm.
And the crime lab's not, can't evaluate testimony, so you're gonna have to have a legal team to go over the testimony. In some cases, it's obvious, you know. In other cases, the problem is, it's not just the scientist, it's also the district attorney. How, you know, in his summation. So you're gonna end up not only with the testimony of the scientist, but you have to review the summation at the end by the district attorney.
And we're looking at 3 separate areas, because for us, when we get this, we have to pull and find our hard file to see if it even contains the document, and then that just tells us it's in the file. And then depending on the disposition of the case, if it did go to trial, then there's a trial court record, and trial court records are kept in the one clerk's office. That would be another place you look, and then if it's a matter of transcripts of the trial, that would be a third inquiry. So there's lots, all this stuff is not combined in one place. And we don't internally keep any records that tell us on the face of what we find, how we use that evidence and how it was considered. I mean, there's no way of knowing that without finding our file. Just tells us if it was in there. You know, it doesn't really help us at all. It's only if there is a trial that it was looked at. And I guess if we're pushing it to the end, if it was a plea, then how do we analyze how much of a factor for the basis of the person that, you know, pled guilty, what they got advice from their attorney. So I think at some point, there's going to be just a limit to how far we can go, and there's just going to be so many players, and some of these people won't even be around to talk about it.
Well, listen, y'all, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about this whole situation, because, I mean, we're looking at it now, we see all these problems, and because it's got a lot of moving parts to it. But I got to tell you, I think this is the biggest opportunity that the legal community and the forensic community are going to have, and have had so far, to come together and come up with a joint solution. I'm going to tell you the power behind what we have in front of us and solving this problem is. So, and came up with an earlier report. You know, yesterday I had lunch with Rod Ponton, the DA, that's challenging us with the AG opinion. He was actually a very intelligent, thoughtful guy, and asked me to say that. No, he didn't ask me to say that. But he is. And he's open-minded, I understand it. So, and I'm viewing this arson process that we've gone through as kind of a growing pain situation. We're learning as we go. And I think his big concern was the initial notice, and I had to reassure him, look, you know, that wasn't deliberate. We're not perfect, we haven't got all this figured out. Here's the point I'm trying to make. When Ponton and I were able to get over the Sonia Casey case and start talking about the future, and I explained to him the hair and fiber microscopy process, which he didn't even know about, he got real interested. And said, and I invited him to become part of a process that we could start putting together to get it done. Here's what I think we have to do. Number one, we're going to have to find some funding sources. This is one big project. It's going to take some scientists, it's going to take some lawyers. I've approached the state bar to a fairly lukewarm response so far, but I'm used to that because I've been over there for a long time, and they just don't get hot about much. Okay, they don't. But they've got money, and they've got a lot of lawyers from firms who will work for plaques and recognition in the Bar Journal. I mean, that's enough for them. And that's what it's going to take to get funding and to get some grants rolling. I think that's how we got to do this. And Lynn and I have talked about it for a long time. They will work for plaques.
That's because they're getting paid a lot of other money.
Yeah, they've got plenty of money to go around. Okay, and some of them have guilty consciences, and there is some real interest in this process. So here's what I think we ought to do. I don't want to get hung up on the form that it takes. Either it's the state bar, or it's some other ad hoc thing that can later on become a state bar committee. But if we can get some law firms involved, we can find some money that would even help out these labs. That's a good project that people feel good about doing. But we've got to get together a group of people that can identify all those problems, get busy on it pretty quick. And I think there's another core point of view here that I think we all agree on, and probably to the point that we don't even need to express it, but I want to mention it anyway. It is imperative that this be a Texas-based project, just like the arson review was, that we not have this thing run by people from NACDL or anything else. If we're going to have any credibility with what we do, we've got to have players that know that not every one of these cases requires a reversal, because they don't. Just like the arson thing, you know, they're not 900 cases. There are 900 cases to review, and there's 9 cases to look at after that review gets done. We're in the same thing, except much bigger by numbers. And I think we can take the lessons we've learned from arson, apply it to this, get some big firms involved and do it. And that's what I'm all in favor of. And the Innocence Project can't do it because we're not a forensic review project. Our job is to get these innocent guys out. I mean, we only did the arson thing because there wasn't anybody else to do it. I think now we've got to get those other people to do it, and I think we can go find them. And if you guys support me on that, I think we can really go back to the state bar with a beefier recommendation, and I can make it happen, or try.
I think the first thing is the cases have to be identified. So this is with the labs. Now, if they don't have the personnel, there's going to have to be some funding from some group so that they can work overtime.
One thing we might do, to Dr. DeMaio's point, is maybe assemble a small group of commissioners, that can work with the few different stakeholders. So one would be the Texas Association of Crime Lab Directors, and Bill is here, and he's the new president, and you all know Bill, but he was elected June? Was that when you got elected? He missed the meeting, so he got elected. But those 20 labs that have responded to the commission's request are absolutely critical. So maybe the first step would be that the subgroup of commissioners get with them to figure out how to move forward, and then also with the groups that Jeff suggests, and perhaps put together at least an initial group of stakeholders to try to figure out a protocol or to figure out what needs to be done to identify the cases. And then we could maybe move forward from there.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that if you have an ad hoc committee that looks into it, comes up with a strategy or a plan, how we should go forward, because there are, as you said, there are so many different aspects of the whole thing, and I think that's a great way to start.
And I do want to mention one other thing, Lynn, I'm not trying to, and Lynn mentioned this too. I've had several conversations with Rob Keppel at the Texas District and County Attorneys Association, and they weren't lukewarm about this. They get it. This is a great way for them to, in a blameless way. The problem with innocence cases generally is there's always somebody to blame, okay? Well, this is when the lawyers get to not have to blame lawyers and we can blame scientists. It's attractive to them. And that's very important. So they're not as personally invested. You know, when it's all just a matter of, well, the science has changed and none of us knew.
Is that right, Richard?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's true. And they're pretty enthused. I think that I've talked to Marianne Wiley at the governor's office. I think there's some possibility of financing. We just have to coordinate it and put it together as one effort. Start looking for that money. I think we're going to find it.
The first goal is to identify the cases, but the lab's more cooperative. Once you do that, once we start working on it, the other labs are going to come in just on the basis of public pressure. Right? So eventually we'll get all the labs.
Well, we also want to be sensitive to their workloads.
Right.
And try to help them do it, not
Right.
just say you will do it and tough cookies if it means that you can't do your other work. Bill, do you have any thoughts on this, or?
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of the labs not wanting to cooperate. I think you're right. It's resources. You know, we're dying on backlogs, and I think the plan has to include some kind of a plan on the front end to help these labs do the job that needs to be done, but not impact their caseload any more than it already is by some of the other things we deal with. So I think our association would be happy to partner with anybody in order to, you know, try to come up with a comprehensive plan that will work for the labs and work for the system to try to get these resolved.
Great. So, since Dr. Kerrigan is not with us today, I think we could, and I know she's interested in working on this, we can, I think safely and without offending or upsetting her, we can nominate her to be part of the ad hoc. I just,
Last time she will show up.
I feel you, and if she later says that this is an outrage, you can all blame me, but I think she, you know, she's a forensic scientist who is not an ME, but I think we probably need someone to be on there that can do it full-time, and I mean, not full-time, but I think she has the time available to the extent she has any time to do anything else. This would be something she'd be interested in. And you can blame me if she says no later.
No, what it proves is you better attend every meeting, otherwise you might get something.
Like
And you
Bill
need to be-
found
You need to be
out.
early, or you get assigned duties on that,
Yeah.
if you're the last person in. That's true.
We are video now.
Yeah, and I think it will be great to have. Do you want to do a group of 3 or 4, or what do you think?
I think 3 is a little too small. 4 is better.
So we have Dr. Kerrigan
You're looking at me.
and And,
If Dr. Kerrigan agrees, I'll be happy to be involved in it.
Yeah.
I don't mind serving on that committee.
okay, that's 3,
I'll do it.
4, okay.
That's good. You have one, prosecutor, one defense. I think
Okay.
that's good.
And then we can seek other input as needed from people. That's great. So it'll be Richard, Bobby, Dr. Kerrigan, and Dr. Pirwani.
Okay.
But I think one of the main topics, one of the main things to be done is to identify sources of money that will pay for overtime. I think that's very important, because I think if you have the overtime money, you're gonna have people volunteer.
Yes, they'll want to do it.
They'll want to do.
Yeah, that depends on the way the structure is whether they allow you to get paid overtime.
Mm.
So not every place does that.
Is that true?
Do
And
you
Lynn,
have-
did you say that Sam Houston is looking into whether or not, they're currently looking into whether or not any of the budget we have can be used for this?
Yes, so it occurred to me so we have about, if you look at the budget, we have quite a bit of cash that could be used toward a number of projects. This could be one of those projects. But it occurred to me that the state auditing rules, I'm not sure if they allow for us to transfer funds that were appropriated to the commission to other agencies, or if there's a way to do that somehow through contracts or whatever. I contacted the university administration, still waiting for a response. It takes a while to hear from them on things, especially big questions like this. So we'll keep working on that and try to figure it out. It could be that perhaps the commission delegates to this group the discretion to expend funds as needed, as long as they can be done legally. We'll meet again in January, so it's not like there's going to be a ton of money going out between now and then, that's for sure.
Let me say that most labs, and Dr. Bernard just made a point, most labs, their technical staff and scientific staff are exempt employees. So, I mean, you can't pay them overtime. So they would have to find their own time to do it. And if they do on their own time, the casework is slowed down. So that's the problem.
Well-
We don't pay overtime to exempt employees.
But they can work after hours.
Well, the problem is
But
you
the
get
law-
time and a half in
The law
time
says
or-
you can't
No, but
pay.
you can have a contractual arrangement that,
That would be
That'd have to go to the attorneys, but that's,
just,
yeah, if you generate an hour of comp time and then they're gone, then you've impacted
Your
your
caseload.
caseload. So I think that would have to be addressed, because if they were allowed to be paid, there'd be people interested. I'm just not sure they can.
Maybe the idea would be to get, Bill, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm not sure what all is gonna be involved in this, but if it's a matter of identifying cases, our administrative staff, I mean, I would look at administrative staff, and our administrative staff are not exempt, so you could,
Right.
that could be an option to, is instead of using your technical people to find these cases, is train your administrative staff to do that.
I know the
If it's in a
FBI
format,
did
they
that.
could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
The FBI, that's how they approached it. So their original identification they did using administrative staff who were trained about which cases to look for, and then they got pulled, and then somebody else gave it a second view.
And quite frankly, some administrative staff are probably quicker on the microfiche
Right.
than your technical staff for you.
well,
Yeah.
essentially you would be looking for reports. If there's no report generated, then even if the hair came in, who cares? It wasn't analyzed. So so they don't have to do something very technical. They have to look for reports.
I mean, that's a good point. It's more of a clerical stuff than
Right.
really scientific
Yeah,
stuff.
that would fall within, but then you have to get
Yeah.
approval through the court for the acceptance of that, but yes, they could be paid.
So I think it comes down to sort of brainstorming with the labs how to move forward. And that's the first step, and then trying to figure out which other stakeholders are critical, because the transcript review won't be done by the labs, that's clear. That'll have to be done by a separate group. There obviously will be scientists involved, no question about it, but the grunt work of that once you get the transcripts from the DAs, there has to be a group of people that looks at
Do
them.
we have the FBI model as to how they are doing that, and can we get a copy of that?
We do. We have full access to everything they're doing. In fact, the head of the FBI lab has said, you know, he'll help us with whatever we need. Same thing for NACDL. So we do have access to that. I think what Texas would do might differ a bit from what they're doing, but that's something that we can look at a bit down the line, but we do have full access.
Fantastic,
Yeah.
that'd be good. I just want to look at their concept, what are they trying to achieve, and maybe this would be a starting point for us.
Yeah. They have error categories and all those things. Whether we use the same ones or vary them, I think will be up to the group.
They're modifying the error
Yeah, theirs is in,
categories right now.
yeah, theirs is in constant, I think, flux.
Right.
Or adjustment is probably the better.
Adjustment.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they're still exploring it,
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, they're still trying to figure out where to draw the lines.
We have multiple places where, as we've said, where the issue can arise. One is the analysis, and the other is the utilization of the data and who may have misutilized it.
Right.
Right. Because like in the Eldridge case, the analyst, NACDL did not find any errors by the examiner. And I looked at it, and from what I could tell, there weren't errors by the examiner either. Now keep in mind this was a case in the 90s, so by that time they were already using DNA, and I think the analysts sort of understood the limits of the science a bit better, so it was a later case. But what you do see, and is absolutely fascinating, is in the end, in summation, long after the scientist has left, it's the judge who actually summarizes the hair analysis in a way that's not really accurate. So how do you deal with that? I mean, the scientist is back in the lab, and he can't be there to say, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I said. So you'll see that quite a bit, whether it's the prosecutor or even, and in this case, it wasn't even the prosecutor, it was the judge, so. And that's the constant challenge of, does the gatekeeper understand the scientific principles in a way that allows them to really make good judgment calls? And we can involve Judge Hervey in that. If there are lessons about the judiciary, we absolutely would involve Judge Hervey in that, because I know she'd love to get that out there to her colleagues.
How do we go forward with this then? Will you coordinate with the crime lab directors?
Yes.
And I think it'd be a good idea to get Innocence Project, IPOC involved. Who else should be on that ad hoc committee?
TDCAA, probably TCDLA.
Should we get DPS?
Absolutely DPS. Somebody else that represents the non-DPS labs, like probably Bill or someone that Bill delegates. Who else? We might want to get someone who's more of a subject matter expert in this area, someone who actually did this type of work at some point. I don't know if maybe someone who's in DNA, we could talk to Art about that. But maybe if you allow this smaller group of commissioners to bring the group together, then we can have a little bit more time to figure out who the best representatives are.
Yeah, I think Dr. Sliders had a pretty good interest
Oh,
from our
great,
laboratory,
yeah.
and so it may be that we could get him involved, because he was very interested in trying to get the information
Yeah.
available so that we could take a look at it.
And Dr. Slider's response, you should have it here, he did it in this matrix form, but they've already identified 3,200 cases. I mean, they worked this thing, he must have spent a lot of time working on this, because
Well, somebody did.
somebody did, right? But they've already done a lot of the initial work. So it might be good to have a DPS person, and then maybe Dr. Slider working on behalf of the other labs that are non-DPS, something like that.
So in that case, I'm sorry.
Look,
say in that instance, you have someone who is a supervisor in the physical evidence section and a molecular biologist looking at the hair, not from an analytical standpoint, but kind of the overall spectrum. So I think he is a good one for that.
That'd be great.
I still think one of the main things to do is, if you want to get the other labs involved, is identify where you can get financial support. I think that's very important.
Well, and I think following up with the labs, we got the initial responses, and I think one of the things this group will probably do is follow up with the labs that have said they can't do it and talk to them individually, because again, the obstacles they face may be unique to that lab and that resource issue. And I think that would be a start too, just to follow up with the ones that have said, you know, we just can't do this, and get more details about what exactly are you needing and what exactly could we do if we had the funding to fix that, because I think we're making some assumptions about what the obstacle is. So I think that'd be one of the first things to do, is follow up and maybe get some input from the ones that have provided, to find out how they did that.
And I think the county labs seem to be under special restrictions in terms of what they can and cannot do, whereas some of the other, I don't know if that's been your experience, but there are rules about what can and can't be done in terms of bringing in outside people or paying people, or, you know, trying to find the files. I mean, it seems like there's a challenge there, but we can work with folks for sure.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to pay my non-exempt employee extra money through county funds. I have to get a special code order. I'll have to justify. I'll have to go to human resources. It's not easy to do that,
Yeah.
frankly.
I
But
think
it can be done at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think if the money's coming from somewhere other than the county, they will probably be more
They'll be
on the
conducive.
agreeable
Oh,
end.
yeah, they won't care.
So I think it's doable, but I think it would have to go through the
They'll
clerical
have to
aspect.
come up with a formula, how much, what is the benefits they need. And so the budget office has to be involved in this.
Yeah.
It's a process, let me put it this way.
Yeah, okay. So, do you want to take a vote to delegate to the subgroup the task of bringing stakeholders together to begin this process and report back at the next commission meeting?
Okay, anyone want to make a motion?
Motion be worded.
Created it.
Exactly what she
I'll
said.
make a motion that we create the ad hoc committee that includes
Dr. Kerrigan
Dr. Kerrigan,
Dr. Pirmani.
Pirwani, myself.
and Richard?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll
and,
second the motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Voting aye?
Aye.
Nay? Unanimous.
So we'll get in touch about when the group should meet next.
Okay. And Dr. Kerrigan, we the chairman.
Dr. Kerrigan will chair it.
I forgot that part of it.
The other part of what happens when you're not here.
Schedule one on next
That's
meeting.
subject to council recommendation.
All right, yeah.
It's on video anyway.
Why don't we do that?
We-
Because-
We have some time, it's only 10.
Oh, okay,
I think we have until 11:30.
yes.
That's the
Okay.
latest.
Okay. So we'll just move forward and report back at our next meeting. I think we're on 7.
Yes, we're on 7. The Houston self-disclosure.
Okay, so this is our Salvador situation, and probably the most interesting thing that's happened since the last meeting was that the Court of Criminal Appeals heard oral argument on one of the Salvador cases, and by that I mean it was a defendant who was caught, I believe it was a cocaine case, and the question that the Court of Criminal Appeals posed to the parties was, in what circumstances should misconduct by an analyst in a single case be attributed as a due process violation to the rest of the body of his work? Does that make sense? And you all, we've been
Right.
sending you this stuff as it comes in. And I'm getting a text message that we're offline. Okay.
That doesn't
So-
shut us down, does it?
No, it doesn't. We'll
No,
keep
no.
going, but I just want to let them know. So,
Well, does it also, I thought it also addressed whether it affects that case
Yeah, that
and other
case-
evidence in that particular case.
Right.
So not just the work of the analyst in other cases, but does the analyst's presence on a case impact evidence potentially that they may not even have handled or that other independent analysts could then look at?
I think the latter is definitely true. So, in the Cody case, the Cody case was not one of the cases involving misconduct that Salvador committed. So it wasn't the El Praise Lamb case, it wasn't the cocaine case that we talked about last time. There's no evidence of misconduct in the Cody case. And another analyst reviewed that evidence and came up with the same conclusion, which was that the evidence tested positive for cocaine. But the question is, should the court presume that because Salvador was unreliable in other cases, that he's equally unreliable in this case, and therefore the conviction should be overturned? I think both sides did a great job arguing the points that they had. The defense obviously was interested in applying a presumption of invalidity as broadly as possible, where the prosecution was trying to restrict it to cases, they conceded cases where evidence no longer exists, but where evidence does exist is left to retest, and there's no problem with the chain of custody, at least not one that's been identified. They thought that those cases, the burden of proof should be on the person seeking to have their conviction overturned, not on the state, in terms of proving the validity. So the court heard the oral argument. The questions from the court made it very clear that they had read the materials, knew what was going on, and understand the significance of their decision in the case. So we'll see how the court comes down on that. I think, from what I understand, they'll render their opinion fairly quickly when it comes to court decisions. They try to move as expeditiously as they can. So as soon as we get a decision, we'll let you know. In terms of where we stand with the retesting, DPS continues to send us updated spreadsheets. There haven't been any additional dry labbing cases identified since last time. If we get anything like that, we will alert you immediately and, of course, bring it up at the next meeting. Any questions on the DPS stuff?
Next, the Forensic Development Committee update.
Okay, so Dr. Kerrigan's not here, but I will do my best to talk about what's gone on, and there's been a lot. We had the roundtables the day before the last commission meeting, and we released these reports, the white papers, for your review. These have not gone out for approval by anyone who participated. They haven't been published. But they are in here, and I'd love to hear your feedback on them. The versions in the Dropbox include Dr. Kerrigan's edits. She had what I think she would describe as more clarifying edits. There weren't very many of them, but nothing that changed the substance of the papers. So it would be great to get your feedback on those, and then we'll move on to some other things. Did you have a chance to look at them?
Yeah, I did. I didn't have anything to add or change about
No?
them. No.
No edits?
No edits.
Yeah, I think you sent me those.
Yeah, and Dr. DeMaio gave his comments to me, and we integrated them, which they were clarifying comments also about, there are some disciplines for which there are no certification
Right.
bodies. They tend to be sub-disciplines, say of trace or firearms, sort of real specialty areas.
Yeah, I think we were talking about tool marks,
Tool marks.
which is under firearms.
Right, and so what we didn't want to do was get so specific that we were categorizing things improperly. In other words, we wanted to leave it open enough, because I don't know that we have a full handle on every single subspecialty that does and does not have a certification body, so we didn't want to misname something.
Yeah, I think that you know, the overall concept is a good concept. I think there are several issues, well, there's quite a few issues that will come up with this. One of would be that, you know, getting a uniformity of training. An exam that when someone passes that exam, it's not just limited to one little area, or then you go somewhere else, you got to take a whole different exam, similar to what we go through in pathology. But one of the issues becomes cost. And another issue becomes someone who's been working for many years, who has been trained, qualified, testifies, and then you get down years later to one of these situations, and then say there's an accreditation issue, and the issue then comes back to all the cases that work. So there are things to go through. I think the overall is a good thing. I know in pathology, at one time they kind of grandfathered the ability to take the test, or they grandfathered them in, and then from a certain standpoint, time point, then they move forward with it. But I do think there's some issues that do have to be, I think the overall idea is the right idea. It's how to deal with kind of the history of it.
In forensic pathology, the first group was grandfathered in. And then the second group, they had to take the test, but, you know, there was, you didn't have to go through any training, because there were no training programs.
Right.
So,
Then that changed eventually.
Right.
You had a training program.
right, well, they used 2 years study, you know.
Right.
But the first group was grandfathered. I think it was, I got the list somewhere. It's about 55.
So I just think those are issues that kind of have to have some thoughtful approach on how that's handled. But I think the overall idea is the right idea. You hire someone from another state and their training is possibly very different, maybe better, maybe worse from elsewhere, then you have to put them back through the training program again. But if they took a test that was a uniform examination, you have some at least level of competence that would be nationwide rather than limited. And I know a lot of people in Texas think, well, we need to have, if we're going to do anything, it needs to be just a Texas one. But I think that goes back to the same problem.
It's got to be nationwide. It has to be nationwide. I'd like to bring up some other thing, which, okay, the law, the revision under the commissioner's law is that essentially it's covering all the forensic sciences but the autopsy. Well, if we're getting to accreditation and certification, though, does that, with that's not considered part of the autopsy. So if you're starting to, if you have, say, you have to accredit all crime labs, you're going to have to accredit all medical examiner's offices. You're not touching the autopsy, or are you?
Well, that hasn't been brought in yet. Well, the indication is that that's probably forthcoming.
Right, and it doesn't bother you two people, I mean, because you've already taken care of the accreditation. But the whole thing is if you're accrediting, because when the original law was passed on accrediting crime labs, that came up. There was a meeting.
DPS exempted the medical exam.
Right, and they exempted it, but the way that's being extended now, there's a good possibility that we're going to have to accredit medical examiner's offices, which is going to be a problem to accredit. Because I testified in front of the legislature a couple of years ago, it had to do with accreditation and certification. There was no problem with certification. No problem with certification, because it didn't cost anybody any money. The accreditation is going to cost some groups. Galveston's an example.
There are lots of groups. El Paso is an example. Lubbock is an example. In the Valley, you have a medical examiner's office.
Lubbock was accredited, and they say that they could probably get accredited if they tried.
Well, you know,
With certification, I think certification is very important. I think that
Yeah,
anybody
the certification.
practices forensic.
Yeah, certification is more important.
Well, Maine has apparently come up with a secondary accreditation now, which I'm not really sure of exactly why they did it. It's the facility can be accredited versus a more rigorous accreditation, which,
I think
You know,
they came up because of the private labs, you know, that actually had the facilities. Well, the ones I know are run by board certified people anyways.
that's a different point of debate.
No, what the problem that arose, I don't know if we should talk about it.
Yeah.
The problem that arose was that one of the requirements was that you filled in the death certificates and had, you know, jurisdiction. And so that's essentially, the accreditation is the same, except they removed the thing that, you know, you signed death certificates and such, and your office was in charge of the investigations. That's what they removed. But it's just, but apparently it's virtually the same thing. So the accreditation is, and certification, I think, going to, because it doesn't really affect the autopsy. And you could argue the certification would affect the autopsy, but no one's supposed to.
You know, in Texas, if you have a license, you could basically practice anything.
Yes, I know that.
Okay, so how are we going to address that issue? I mean, the doctors are going to have a lot of issue with this, because if you require a medical doctor to be certified in forensic, and then only can you do forensic, then that has an impact and opens the doors for all the other specialties.
No, what they say, to be a medical examiner, you have to be certified, that's all. I mean, you know, if you, what the law would say is that if you are hired to be a medical examiner, you have to be certified in forensic pathology at the time, or, you know, they give you the 2 years to be certified.
So how would the state address the issue that there are only how many practicing forensic pathologists in the country?
Yeah, it doesn't, okay, we're talking Texas. Essentially, in Texas, I would say virtually all the people doing autopsies, forensic autopsies are certified.
I don't think that's right.
Okay, do you hire the non-certified?
Well, no, I'm not talking about my office, I'm talking about statewide. You've got people who might be fellows who then have not yet.
Not passed the exam.
No,
They
no,
would
no,
set
no,
the
yeah,
exam.
but that's covered under the law. They, you know, that's not a problem. If you've got people in training like that, that's not a problem, because they always have it under direct supervision.
Well, and then they may get hired and they're waiting to sit for the exam.
No,
and say
no problem at all. You have a 2 to 3 year.
I would say then, if that part is not an issue, there probably are still a few that are out there that are not certified. And it may be they're not certified because of the AP certification
Well,
part.
that's
So-
the AP.
Right.
They can't pass the AP.
But I believe to address that specifically, there are people in the state, and they may not be in a major ME office, but they might be some of those who are out in the private sector working in some regional area that may not be certified.
Okay, the private groups I know of are being run by certified.
I do think there are, though.
I'm sure there's 1 or 2, but I don't think that the manpower thing is a problem, honestly.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying I think that there
No,
are a
no,
couple.
no, I'm talking, I don't think it's gonna be a manpower problem.
I think that on the long run, nationwide, that's going to be an issue if this becomes across the board for the entire country. We just have, I don't know how many board certified forensic pathologists are practicing in USA, but I would dare say not more than 600, 700, right?
Yeah, and you need 1,200.
Yes. So
But, I agree with that, but I think in Texas, I would bet you that the bulk of the forensic autopsies are being done.
Oh, I would agree
board
with that.
certified.
Oh,
Yeah,
I would
that's what
agree with that.
Right,
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it's a small thing.
Yeah.
And I know that if anyone brings it in front of the legislature, they're not going to oppose certification. The reason is there's no financial impact on the counties. So it's the accreditation that's going to be interesting. But I think that down the line, there's something's going to have to be done about accreditation. Because if you're accrediting crime labs, then what's your reason for not accrediting medical exams?
Well, the evidence being examined then by the crime lab is being recovered
Right,
from the laboratories.
right,
That's
so,
from the ME offices.
yeah, so I think that's gonna be a,
Oh, yeah.
when somebody brings it up, like the Innocent Project people, you know, I think it could be a problem down the line. But that, I was just interjecting that because, you know, with the expansion of the law and the things that we're covering, now it's not the autopsy per se, but it's the, you know, difference between doing an autopsy in the back of a funeral home versus a properly, you know, some places for years weren't even weighing bodies and things like that.
I think these issues with the forensic pathologist accreditation and certification and what the commission's jurisdiction is or isn't over autopsies, you know, we know where we stand on autopsies for now, but I would imagine that, I mean, all it takes is one legislator to take an interest, and then the focus will zone right in there. So I think we should just keep it in mind as we move forward, especially into the next session.
Yeah, I'm just bringing out, that was my purpose, to the things that we might have considered that there may be some circumstances going down the line.
Yeah, definitely. I think on these papers, it would be great if we could get a vote from the body to move forward in publishing them. And by that, I mean allowing the Forensic Development Committee to incorporate any final edits that might be out there and publish them on the Commission's website, distribute them to stakeholders and so forth. Unless you all have additional comments, we would like to go ahead and move to get these out there for the public to view.
Okay,
I'll make
who wants to make the
Motion this be published.
second?
Second.
Aye? Nay? Unanimous?
And then the second point is, especially in the certification paper, we have action steps that need to be taken, and some of those action steps involve collaboration with other entities like TACLID, like the universities that have VPAC accredited programs. And what would be great is to get a vote by the body to allow the Forensic Development Committee and the staff to move forward on these action steps, including any reasonable expenditures that might be necessary to implement those items. If you all are okay with the action steps that the stakeholders came up with, we'd like to go ahead and start working on them.
Does anyone make a motion to that effect? Second? Aye? Nay? Unanimous?
So those are the, on the roundtables, that's where we stand with those. The next point I wanted to talk to you about is a report on how the training of the lab managers went. And Bill attended, so he's here and can tell us what he thought. But we did a survey of the group, and it seems like people really enjoyed the training. There were some parts of it, obviously, that they liked better than others, but I think it was very valuable and worthwhile. I got a lot of really positive input, and one of the things that people said is they'd like to be able to offer similar training to other folks in their organization. So the question then becomes whether the commission might consider pulling together a similar training, obviously using the lessons learned from the last training and sort of tweaking the offerings and the subject matter that's covered, but perhaps doing one in North Texas and one in South Texas or in the Houston area, something like that, where the labs could send other people in their management structure, sort of rising leaders, things like that. This last one was basically the heads of the laboratories, and I don't know, Bill, how you felt about it, but perhaps you might like to send somebody else if it were offered again, or...
Yeah, the training was, I was really impressed with the training. I thought it was well worth it. I thought that getting the lab directors in the room together and spending 3 days and really talking about our issues as well as talking about concepts was really good. Yeah, I would love to send my bid management folks to it, because I think it's that trickle-down effect. If you can get everybody on the same page in your laboratory, I think it's just gonna be that much better for us. Plus, it gives them an opportunity to collaborate with some of the other lab people in the other areas. So I think having it again for some of the other people that were not able to make it, or some of your bid management folks, I think it'd be really beneficial for all of us.
Thank you. Do you all have questions about, you have the material that was covered. I think people really liked, the staff was from West Virginia University, and they do this work all the time. Dean Gialamas, who was the first day, I think got the best reception. People really liked his offerings, and I think that's because he runs a lab, so everything he did was very targeted toward the specific types of issues that lab directors and lab management face. Max Hauk did the second day. There was some of his presentation that I think probably either could have been covered differently, because the examples that were used were not as practical as some of the others, so we might tweak that a bit. He also went into some detail about foresight, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the third day, there was a more general leadership training, and I think people really liked the instructor there. I thought people really enjoyed that, and they got to do a lot of icebreaker or sort of personality testing and things like that. Those things were valuable. So we'll have to work on the agenda, but it will require money. Thankfully, we have some.
Right.
But it might be good to let the Forensic Development Committee figure out, should we do one in Dallas and one in Houston? Should we stick with Central Texas or what? And then come up with a budget, and we could vote on that at the next meeting.
Need a motion? I move that we explore expanding this to other locations, and that we advise the staff to work to find out what it would cost for discussion at the next meeting.
Second?
Second.
Aye. Nay. Unanimous.
Depending on how many there are, I mean, I've got a facility that's could house 100 people or so, so that we may be able to cut some cost in terms of the training side.
Right. Okay.
I think Dallas is obvious. Where would your secondary?
Maybe Houston. Sam Houston has a facility in the Woodlands that's new that could host a lot of people. I think that would be one option. We did the first one in Austin, so that sort of covers San Antonio too. I mean, we could do 3, central, north, and south. It just depends on what kind of a deal we could get on hosting them.
Population-wise, I
Also
think
might
Houston
be-
would make more sense.
Pardon?
Population-wise, Houston would.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
ton of people in Houston. I mean, between Harris County, HPD, Pasadena, I mean,
Yeah, I
that's,
guess it is.
And Nueces is pretty close to Harris County.
pardon?
Nueces County.
Oasis, yeah. It's a lot of people down there. And then the DPS labs that are there.
That probably makes sense.
Okay, so then, one of the things that came up at the training was, do you all know what the Foresight project is? It's out of West Virginia University, and it essentially, through a very sophisticated data collection process from the laboratories, it helps labs understand whether they're using their resources well, whether they should shift resources. It allows for them to submit data and have that data compiled, reported back to them in ways that are useful to them to help them make budgetary decisions. And otherwise, it's sort of a management tool. And what we talked about during the training was whether labs would like to participate in that. It's free to submit the data, but obviously to get to the point where you're able to submit that data, you need to have staff collecting it in a format that the university can interpret and spit back to you in a useful way. So there was a lot of energy and I think excitement among the people who attended the training on starting down that road. And what the idea would be is that all of the labs in Texas would participate, get their data in, and then the commission could host meetings where they could compare notes among themselves. You know, it looks like you're doing drug cases at this rate per case. How are you able to do that? You know, are there things that we could do in our processes to make our case analysis more efficient, or is it just something particular to your location? The challenge then became, well, if you're going to do that, in order to make it valuable, you really have to have as many labs participating as possible. And we asked DPS about it. They have started with Austin. They're submitting data to Foresight from their Austin lab, but they really aren't prepared at this time to do it for all of their labs. And unless you have DPS there, there's some question about how useful it would be to the rest of the group. Bill, I'm sorry to keep putting you on the spot, but you remember the discussion about Foresight. Would you all participate in that? If
We're actually having an intern come in this next semester to help us compile our numbers so that we can, and it's a good project for the intern, but it also gets our numbers together so we can submit. So we're looking at submitting probably early next year with submit.
Okay. So what we might consider doing is, you know, I think the reason DPS is not ready to do the analysis for all of its campuses is that it just doesn't have the resources to do it. But maybe we could explore the issue a little further with Pat and see when they might be able to do it. And then I know there are a number of other labs, APD and some others, who really want to use the Foresight program because it's free, and the only thing that would cost money to them is that sort of annual meeting where they all get together to compare notes, but that might be something the commission could help support. So maybe what we should do is continue exploring whether Foresight is a good idea for all of the labs through the Forensic Development Committee, and try to be creative in how to get them to participate, understanding that they have a lot of competing needs in terms of where their resources go. But in theory, it's a good idea. In application, it's another one of these things that we're asking them to consider to do that they don't really have the people to do it with. So
I think the resource management is a very important part, and perhaps an integral part of running an efficient laboratory. When using public resources to do your work, that's very important. And I think the lab should, most labs have other people besides the technician doing such things. You know, I have a budget office in my office. I'm sure you have that also, right? A budget director and accountant and all that. And getting numbers and doing all that is not very difficult, really.
yeah, I think there's a finance office at DPS that would have to get involved, and I think every organization is different. We just have to work with them to see how to do it. But the whole point of Foresight, like you say, Dr. Pirwani, is to realize efficiencies within the lab, managerial efficiencies, resource efficiencies. So
I mean, the first step is the numbers.
Right.
We addressed that a few months back. There was X lab that the chemist was doing just 30 drug cases a month.
Right.
And we said that that's really very low. I mean, the chemist can easily do, and correct me, at least 80 or 90 drug cases a month. And so they wanted 3 technicians to do the work.
Right.
So there's an issue there. So I think those numbers are very important to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And it allows you, the theory is it would allow you to see, against a backdrop of your colleagues and peers in other labs, how many cases are people doing and how much is it costing them. And like if in a lab they implemented some process to bring their costs down, maybe other labs, if they heard that, would say, oh, well, we could do that here too. So it is about being wise stewards of public funds and trying to be as efficient as possible.
I think that's a good idea, because you have to try and break down, well, how many analyses do they do, or how many cases do they do? Because one case could have multiple analyses. Trying to get some idea of what a good number is per analyst, or what techniques are being used, and that's, I think ultimately the taxpayers benefit. and the laboratories benefit.
And sometimes I think with a lot of the labs, they have so much work that they don't necessarily stop to reflect on those issues as much as they might like if given the resources to do it.
You know, most labs, at least labs in large jurisdiction, have a QA, QC person. You have one and I have one. And one of his job is to come up with reports on a quarterly basis, talk about efficiency. And so that is an issue that we all, you know, we recognize that no matter what we say, the government is not going to give me more than 3% more money next year at the most. So how am I going to utilize that 3%? And some years they don't give us any money,
some years we don't get
especially if
anything,
I'm
yeah.
in Dallas, you know.
Yeah.
Just say 3% sound pretty good.
So the question is that with the same amount of money or similar allocation, how can I do better? How can I improve? How can I serve the public better? And that's part and parcel of being an efficient and qualified lab. Yeah.
So should we take a,
But I don't think we need a really official vote on this. Or,
no, I think the Forensic Development Group should just come back with a report on where the labs stand and what we might do to help them move forward with foresight at the next meeting.
Did Max give you anything about foresight, any material?
He did. He
Can
did
you-
a whole
can you send me a-
presentation. Yep.
Can you send me that?
Yep, sure. Can you put that in there? And he did a presentation on it, and he showed, you know, some of the data just looks, it's like, why would it cost $2,000 per case in this one area? Do you really need this discipline, or should you eliminate it altogether? Is it just costing you too much to have it? Or should all of the, you know, the document analysis be done in one lab in the state
Outsourcing.
and stuff like that? When to
And
outsource?
that really makes sense. I mean, managing resources is important.
So we'll follow up next time, and Richard, you need a break?
Yeah.
Okay. You
Just
wanna do 5 minute break?
okay, 5-minute break. Okay, you can continue.
Yeah, we are on, okay, we're in forensic development.
We're at 8.
Yeah, let me just make sure that I've covered everything here. Yeah, I think that was it for forensic development, so we'll just keep moving forward on the various projects that are outstanding. We can move to 9 now.
Yeah, that's-
So, yeah, 9 is the discussion of the Brady training video. And Carson, did you want to, if you recall, what we were going to do is work with Judge Hervey, and this was her idea in creating a training video on Brady versus Maryland for forensic scientists, where they can understand what their obligations are. And we haven't really moved forward on it yet, but I know that they are looking into some things.
Yeah, we're working on a script right now. We've spoken with the State Bar of Texas. My understanding is that they'll help us again with this second video. And like Glenn said, the idea is just that the video is tailored specifically towards lab techs so that they can have a better understanding of exactly what their obligations are under Brady if they work at a state crime lab or something like that.
So we'll update you on progress there. I think once we get the people in place, it's just a matter of sitting in the recording studio and shooting the video. But we also need forensic scientists who are willing to read the script, and and the court has been very busy recently, so when Judge Hervey frees up soon, we'll move forward on that.
Is it probably this principally for attorneys?
This will be for scientists.
Oh, okay.
They've already done one for police officers and attorneys, I think, for sure. I mean, the Prosecutor Association trains on Brady all the time.
We haven't ourselves produced a video on Brady for prosecutors, but we have for police officers. And it was police officers that hosted the video and spoke about personal stories that they had experienced, and just to try to make a more friendly environment for police officers to learn from other police officers. And we would hope to do the same thing here, where laboratory technicians and other lab people can teach, their colleagues. So no action on that?
No
No.
action. It's just a report. The next item is the new policies and procedures, and that's behind tab number 10. Basically, what we did here was just revise the policies and procedures to reflect the new statute. So instead of having very strict limitations around negligence or misconduct, having those limited just to accredited crime labs, we emphasize that that's still the case on those analyses, but that the commission has the ability to take on cases for educational purposes and so forth. We didn't change anything substantively except to make sure that the commission's newly clarified jurisdiction is reflected here. So if you go through, you know, the responsibilities are straight out of the statute. And then we talk about the different subcategories of investigation. We revised the definitions to include the new definitions out of the statute. We clarified where the membership comes from now, and that's from the governor's office. There's still the 2-year terms. Trying to think if, you know, the meetings section stayed the same, the committees are the same, the processing of complaints are essentially the same, except that we indicate that the complaint screening committee can make a recommendation to accept a case based on the newly expanded jurisdiction. Investigative panels are the same. Forensic development, I mean, it essentially just updates what we already do to reflect the new jurisdiction. Now, one thing I did change, and I wish Dr. Kerrigan was here to look at this, but if you recall, there were definitions of negligence and misconduct. Professional misconduct and professional negligence. These definitions are the same as they were, except that it used to say that professional misconduct or professional negligence means the actor, when looking at all evidence from the actor's standpoint, through a material act or omission negligently followed to fail the standard of practice. I removed the viewing everything from the actor's standpoint because I've never seen a definition of misconduct or analysis that requires you to view everything from the actor's standpoint. I mean, it just doesn't, to me, make good sense from a legal perspective. So what we might do is, because we are short on members here, we have the 5, perhaps it would be good to give the membership another meeting to take a look at these, and if you all have feedback, you could provide them. If people want revisions to definitions or anything like that, we could talk about it. I tried to do what was obvious and necessary, but I think maybe a little bit more time would be helpful.
I'll move the table it to the next meeting then.
Second. Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay, so we'll table that, and then item number 11 is just to let you know that Dr. Kerrigan spoke at the Texas Tribune Festival. She was on a panel with some very distinguished folks. Dr. Pirwani spoke on the same at the same festival last year, and I think it went real well. I wasn't there because I think the baby. I want to say the baby was like 5 days old or something. I considered going, but then reality set in, and I decided not to. But they did live blog the whole thing, which was great because we got to see some of the comments, and of course Dr. Kerrigan did a great job, and I think the commission was well represented. So hopefully they'll include us every year. They have so far. And she can talk more about her experience next time. So that's it on number 11. 12? You want to go on to 12?
Yeah.
Okay, so
12 following 11.
number 12 is the academy
American
meeting
Academy.
is coming up in February, and we submitted abstracts. The state fire marshal also submitted an abstract on their training and arson review initiatives. And I believe that all of those abstracts are here. We haven't heard back yet on whether they've been accepted, which I thought, don't they typically notify in October?
They do.
Yeah, this is, but I submitted another abstract also, and I haven't heard back, so has anyone submitted anything?
Nobody has heard so far, so.
Okay, so.
So I guess they're just running a little behind.
They're running behind, right?
Okay, so we'll let you know when we hear. Now, all of the commission's abstracts went to the jurisprudence section because they're more sort of process policy, legal type discussions than pure scientific discussions. So we'll hear from them when we hear from them, and we'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, and the other thing, if you're attending the academy to do a presentation on the commission's abstracts, let us know and we'll reimburse you for expenses, for sure. And then we just need to schedule the next meeting and hear public comment.
Okay. You got the
When would you
calendar?
like to meet again? Typically, we meet in January.
The first Friday's the 3rd, second's the 10th,
First Friday is the third.
3rd, second, 10th, and then the 17th.
I think, you know, there are people who go away for New Year's and things like that. So I think the third is out. I
Yeah.
would say the 10th is good because everyone's just starting to gear up and probably doesn't have any commitments on the 10th.
How do your calendars look?
10th is okay for me.
What I can do is probably circulate an email since there's so many missing.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
that's
Not,
true.
not do it now.
So we don't just have
decide
5
now.
people?
When will we be getting the new people?
Well, that's sort of up to the governor's discretion. I know they're definitely in the process of making announcements on their appointments, but I think they're still waiting for names, at least from Texas A&M. But I think TCDLA, TDCAA, and UT have submitted their names. And so, but the governor can't move forward on the appointments until they have the list of names. But I know they're working on it, that's for certain. We should hear before the next meeting, I would think.
Okay. So tentatively, January the 10th, until we get all feedback, because we're missing so many people.
Yeah, it would be either 10, 17, or 24. Does anyone have conflicts? Who's here?
17th is out for me.
17th is out?
Last week of January is out for me.
Okay, so we really are looking at,
The
oh,
10th.
the 31st, you mean, Dr. Bernard, or the 24th?
Yeah, that, the 29th through the 2nd of February I'm out.
So the options are 10 or
10 and
24, sounds like, from the group who's here.
Right.
Mhm.
I'll bet you the 10th is gonna probably be the best because it's too early. You know, people are just coming back and they're just getting started and
Okay.
probably don't have commitments. Are we going to be having the other meeting here if possible?
We'll definitely try, if people are still happy having it here. It's
Yes.
okay. Are there any, besides all of the agenda items that are here that we're gonna follow up on, does anyone wanna add anything to the agenda that's not here? Or that we haven't been reviewing until now?
The only thing I was, is we've already discussed, I have to check about the accreditation and the certification.
Anything? You can email us with agenda items also. And then public comment.
Any public comments? Here, Sam, yes?
Devin Cox from the Innocence Project. I would just like to say on behalf of the Innocence Project, it's always great to see the great work Commission does, especially without the hair review. We're excited to see, how the subcommittee deals with all the issues of collapse. It'll be interesting to see, for our view, how other states can kind of follow your lead. So that's it.
Thanks. Anything
Any
else?
other?
Well, I'm from the NSS project, the Thurgood Marshall School Board, I'm just heading over what was just said. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess then, we're going to dismiss without having our special guest.
No, I'm gonna go up and get him.
Okay, let's get the special.
I'll go get it. We can still
We
adjourn the
we
meeting.
I move we
adjourn.
adjourn while the special guest is adjourned.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay.